The low hum of city traffic blended with the muffled chatter inside the elegant restaurant, where chandeliers hung like constellations in a darkened sky. Camila wiped her hands nervously on the hem of her apron, stealing a glance at the room packed with well-dressed patrons. This wasn't her world. It never had been. Yet here she was, maneuvering through tables with practiced grace, serving wine worth more than her monthly rent. Her shift had been uneventful until he walked in. Leonardo. The name rolled off the whispers of the other waitstaff, a subtle reverence reserved for the elite. He wasn't just another wealthy customer, he was the customer, a self-made millionaire known for his ventures in finance and an unmistakable aura of quiet power. Camilla's breath caught when their eyes met. It wasn't his tailored suit or the confidence he wore so easily. It was the warmth in his gaze that unsettled her. "Good evening," she said, her voice betraying her nerves as she approached his table. He smiled, a gesture so genuine it chipped away at her guarded exterior. As the night unfolded, their exchanges were brief, yet electric. He asked for her name, uncommon among patrons, and listened intently when she spoke. By the time she brought the bill to his table, her heart was a quiet storm. He left a tip that seemed too generous, folded neatly alongside his business card. Camila hesitated to pick it up, a flicker of doubt creeping in. Was this genuine kindness, or did his wealth grant him the audacity to treat people like accessories? Her fingers brushed the card as another thought settled in. Maybe, just maybe, not all riches corrupted character. The next day, her co-workers buzzed about the enigmatic millionaire. They spoke of his reputation, his dealings in high-stakes investments, and the rumored coldness beneath his charm. Camila, however, couldn't forget the look in his eyes, as though he saw something in her that even she couldn't fathom. But then again, she knew better than to dream about moneyed men and their lavish lives. Finances had always been a burden to her, not a gateway to romance. Days passed, yet she couldn't shake the pull of curiosity. Late at night, in the privacy of her small apartment, she unfolded the business card he'd left behind. The embossed letters gleamed under the dim light. His name, his number, a world she could only imagine lay behind those numbers, and for the first time, she wondered if stepping through that door would be worth the risk. Her thoughts swirled as she sat by the window, gazing at the neon lights of the city. What could he possibly want from someone like her? She had no wealth, no connections, just dreams she'd long since buried under years of struggle. And yet, the idea of someone like Leonardo noticing her felt intoxicating, even dangerous. It was a distraction she didn't need, but her heart had already betrayed her mind. 2 weeks later, he returned to the restaurant as if fate refused to let her ignore him. This time, he wasn't alone. A group of polished men and women accompanied him, their laughter ringing like a private melody of the privileged. Camila kept her distance, determined to remain professional. But as the evening wore on, Leonardo's eyes found hers again, anchoring her amidst the chaos of expensive wine and indulgent conversations. After the group left, she found an envelope on the table addressed to her. Inside was a handwritten note. "I hope this isn't too forward, but I'd like to know you beyond this place. Call me if you'd like to meet." Camilla's heart raced. She couldn't help but feel that his words carried weight beyond their simplicity. But a new thought crept in. What would it cost her to take that chance? She didn't have his wealth, his influence, or the luxury of chasing dreams without consequence. If she said yes, she'd be stepping into a world where everything about her would be measured, judged, and likely deemed unworthy. And yet, some part of her craved the risk, the possibility of being more than just another invisible figure in a sea of wealthy faces. As she walked home that night, clutching the note, her thoughts oscillated between fear and hope. Was this the beginning of something extraordinary, or a path lined with unseen dangers? And you, what would you do in her place? Would you risk stepping into a life so vastly different from your own? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. The sound of her alarm clock broke the fragile silence of Camila's morning. She reached out to silence it, her fingers brushing against the neatly folded note resting on her nightstand. The words written in Leonardo's hand echoed in her mind, but she hadn't dared to respond. She convinced herself it was better this way. What could she possibly bring to his world, one where fortunes were made and lost with decisions in finance meetings she couldn't begin to understand? Yet the lingering question refused to leave her thoughts. Why had he chosen her? The day unfolded like many others. Orders to take, smiles to fake, and shoes that pinched her feet by mid-afternoon. But inside, she wrestled with a growing unease. It wasn't just Leonardo. It was the way she felt when she thought about him. A pull, like gravity, yet tinged with fear. She was no stranger to the whispers of doubt that had accompanied her since childhood. Money had always been a distant, almost mythical concept. It had defined her limits, forced sacrifices, and now threatened to lure her into something she couldn't control. That evening, as she walked home, the city seemed more alive than usual. Streetlights cast golden reflections on puddles left by a recent rain, and the distant hum of traffic blended with the melody of a violinist playing for tips on the corner. Camila's pace slowed as she approached her building. The envelope weighed heavily in her bag, its presence louder than the city around her. When she reached her apartment, she placed the note on the kitchen counter and stared at it as if it might disappear. Hours passed, the temptation to dial his number growing stronger. What would he say? What would she say? Her breath quickened at the thought, but before her resolve could crumble, she shoved the note back into her bag and buried herself in mundane tasks. The following week, Leonardo appeared again. This time it was just him, seated at a table by the window where the city's skyline stretched like a tapestry of wealth and ambition. Camila felt her stomach tighten as she approached. He looked up and smiled, a disarming expression that carried none of the arrogance she'd come to expect from men like him. "Camila," he greeted her, his tone warm, almost familiar. "I was hoping to see you again." She froze, searching for the right words, but all she managed was a polite, "Good evening, Mr. Leonardo." "Just Leonardo," he corrected gently. "I hope I didn't overstep last time." His sincerity threw her off balance. How could someone so powerful appear so genuine? She shook her head. No, not at all. It was unexpected, that's all. Their conversation was brief, but its impact lingered long after he left. For the first time, she felt the possibility of something beyond the confines of her current life, a chance to be seen, to matter, not for what she lacked, but for who she was. Yet the question of why still haunted her. 2 nights later, as Camila cleared tables, a group of patrons seated near the bar caught her attention. Their laughter was loud, bordering on cruel, and their remarks pierced through the ambient noise. "Can you believe he's interested in her?" one of the women said, her tone dripping with disdain. "She's pretty, I'll give her that, but she doesn't belong in his world." Camila's hands clenched around the tray she was carrying. The weight of their words crushed her confidence, but she forced herself to stay composed. Her steps quickened as she retreated to the kitchen, her chest tightening with a familiar ache. She'd always known this would be the reaction, but hearing it aloud felt like a confirmation of every insecurity she'd ever harbored. As the shift ended, Camila found herself wandering the city streets instead of heading home. The towering skyscrapers loomed overhead, symbols of power and privilege, so far removed from her reality. She thought of Leonardo, his world of high finance and endless resources, and felt the divide between them widen with each passing step. She didn't belong there, she never would, but as the night deepened, another thought emerged. Why should she let others define her worth? If they underestimated her, if they doubted her, perhaps it was time to prove them wrong, not for Leonardo, but for herself. When she finally reached her apartment, her resolve was steadier. The note was still there, waiting, and this time she didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number. Each ring felt like an eternity until his voice came through, calm and collected. "Hello?" Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. "It's Camila." The first meeting was arranged in a cafe nestled in a quiet corner of the city. Camila arrived early, her heart pounding as she clutched her phone, silently rehearsing what she might say. The cafe, with its warm lighting and gentle hum of soft jazz, felt worlds away from the lavish spaces Leonardo likely frequented. Yet when he entered, he looked perfectly at ease, his presence commanding but not overbearing. Leonardo approached her with the same disarming smile, a stark contrast to the opulence she had imagined. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. Camila nodded, her fingers tightening around her cup. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I wasn't sure if this was real." He chuckled softly, the sound carrying no mockery. "I get it. I don't blame you for being cautious." Their conversation began cautiously, two strangers testing the waters. Leonardo asked about her background, her dreams, and even her frustrations. Camila found herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated, revealing fragments of a life shaped by struggles with finances and endless compromises. In return, he shared pieces of his own story, how he had built his wealth from scratch, navigating a world of high stakes and relentless ambition. "Money doesn't fix everything," he said at one point, his gaze distant. "It creates opportunities, but it also builds walls." And his words lingered in Camila's mind long after their meeting ended. For all his wealth, Leonardo carried an unmistakable weight, as though the fortune he'd amassed had exacted a price he rarely spoke of. She left the cafe that evening with mixed emotions, both intrigued and wary. What was this connection forming between them, and where could it possibly lead? The days that followed were anything but ordinary. Leonardo's attentions became more frequent, his presence a constant in her thoughts. He sent messages, never overbearing, always thoughtful, checking in, asking about her day or sharing moments from his life. Camila, despite her reservations, felt herself softening toward him. Yet, as their bond grew, so did the scrutiny from those around them. It started subtly, a co-worker raising an eyebrow at the mention of his name, a regular patron's knowing smirk when she received a message during a shift. But the disdain became more overt one evening when Camila overheard a pair of wealthy diners discussing her at the bar. "She's just a phase," one man said, swirling his whiskey. "He'll lose interest when the novelty wears off." The word stung more than she cared to admit. She had spent her life proving her worth, carving out her space in a world that seemed designed to keep her small. And yet, here she was, reduced to a passing amusement in the eyes of strangers. Leonardo's world, with its glamour and wealth, felt like a double-edged sword. While it drew her closer to him, it also exposed her to a level of judgment she wasn't prepared for. The whispers and sideways glances chipped away at her confidence, forcing her to confront questions she wasn't ready to answer. Was she enough for him? Or was she simply fooling herself, chasing a dream that would inevitably shatter? One evening, as Camila stood on the rooftop of her building, the city stretched out before her in a sea of lights. She thought of Leonardo, his words from the cafe, and the unspoken truths that lingered between them. Money might not fix everything, but it undeniably shaped the contours of their connection. And for the first time, she wondered if love alone could bridge the gap between their worlds. Before she could dwell further, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Leonardo. "Dinner tomorrow, I want to show you something." Her fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation clawing at her resolve. But then she typed her response. "Okay, Where? The address he sent was unfamiliar, but it wasn't in the city's affluent core. It was somewhere quieter, less polished. Camila stared at the message, the anticipation of what awaited her mingling with the unease that had begun to take root. She had no idea what to expect, but she couldn't deny the pull that kept her tethered to this connection, fragile and unpredictable as it was. The next evening, she arrived at the location to find Leonardo waiting for her. It wasn't a restaurant or a gallery or any of the places she had envisioned. Instead, it was a modest community center, its walls adorned with colorful murals and laughter spilling from the windows. He greeted her warmly, leading her inside where children were gathered, working on art projects. "This," he said, gesturing around the room, "is where I come when I need to remind myself of what truly matters." Camila's eyes widened as she took in the scene. This wasn't the world of glitz and deals she had imagined. It was real, raw, and filled with purpose. And for the first time, she saw a side of Leonardo that didn't fit the mold of a self-made millionaire. "Why bring me here?" she asked softly. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Because I want you to see me for who I am, not just what I have." The echoes of children's laughter lingered in Camila's mind, long after she left the community center that evening. Leonardo's choice to show her such a vulnerable human side of his life unsettled her, not in a bad way, but in a way that forced her to confront her assumptions about him. He wasn't just a man of wealth and power. There were layers she hadn't expected, layers that hinted at depth and contradiction, but her newfound perspective didn't erase her doubts. If anything, it complicated them. She spent the night turning his words over in her head. "I want you to see me for who I am, not just what I have." It was sincere, no doubt, but could she trust it? The world he came from didn't exactly nurture transparency. And how much did she really know about him? The next morning, as she made her way to work, Camila was greeted by an unusual sight. A sleek black car was parked outside her building, its windows tinted, its presence almost predatory against the drab facade of her neighborhood. Her pulse quickened as she approached, half expecting Leonardo to emerge. Instead, a man in a tailored suit stepped out and handed her a small envelope. "This is from Mr. Leonardo," he said curtly before retreating back into the car. Camila stared at the envelope, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside was an invitation to an exclusive charity gala, along with a note. "I'd like you to be my guest. No pressure, but I think you'd enjoy it." The thought of attending such an event made her stomach churn. She could already picture the judgmental stares, the whispered conversations, the ever-present reminder that she didn't belong in their world. Still, a part of her was curious. What would it be like to see Leonardo in his element, surrounded by the trappings of his wealth and influence? Could she handle it? Did she even want to? She spent the day wrestling with her decision, her thoughts clouded by the memory of the diner's cruel remarks and the way they'd stripped her of her worth with nothing but words. That evening, as she sat in her small apartment, her mind drifted back to the community center. The children's smiles, the way Leonardo had spoken about the importance of giving back, it was all so different from the cold, calculated image of wealth she'd always known. Maybe, just maybe, he was trying to show her that there was more to him than the surface. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and typed a message. "I'll come to the gala. What should I wear?" The response came quickly. "Something that makes you feel like yourself." The night of the gala arrived faster than she expected. Camila stood before her mirror, smoothing the fabric of the simple yet elegant dress she'd chosen. It wasn't designer, but it fit her perfectly, accentuating her natural beauty without trying to compete with the extravagance she was about to face. Her reflection stared back at her, equal parts nervous and determined. This was her chance to see his world up close and perhaps to decide if she had a place in it. The venue was breathtaking, a grand ballroom draped in shimmering lights, the air thick with the hum of conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Camila felt like an outsider the moment she stepped through the doors, her every movement scrutinized by eyes that seemed to weigh her against invisible standards. Leonardo appeared moments later, his presence instantly calming her. He introduced her to a few key figures, guiding her through the crowd with an ease that left her both awed and intimidated. But it wasn't long before she caught sight of someone familiar. Isabella. The woman exuded confidence, her every gesture polished and deliberate. She approached them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Leonardo," she said smoothly, her gaze flickering to Camila. "And who is this?" "Camila," Leonardo replied firmly, his tone leaving no room for condescension. Isabella's smile widened, though it held an edge. "How lovely to meet you, Camila. I must say, you're quite unexpected." The words were subtle but sharp, slicing through Camila's already fragile confidence. She forced a polite smile, unwilling to give Isabella the satisfaction of a reaction, but the rest of the evening felt like a test, a gauntlet of small talk, subtle jabs, and unspoken judgments. By the time the gala ended, Camila was exhausted, her emotions frayed. As Leonardo walked her to the car, she finally let her guard down. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "You had to know how out of place I'd feel." He paused, his expression unreadable. "I brought you because I wanted you to see that none of this matters, not to me. What matters is how you see yourself." Camila's breath hitched at his words. They were simple, yet they carried a weight that felt impossible to ignore. But before she could respond, Isabella appeared once more, her presence a deliberate intrusion. "Leonardo," she said, her tone light but calculated, "I didn't get a chance to tell you earlier, but there's something you should know. About Camila." Camila froze, her heart pounding as Isabella's words hung in the air, a sinister promise of what was to come. The air seemed to thicken as Isabella's words lingered, a cruel anticipation etched into her sharp smile. Leonardo's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced between the two women. Camila's chest tightened, her thoughts racing. What could Isabella possibly know about her? And why now, of all moments, did she choose to strike? "Whatever you think you know, Isabella," Leonardo said, his voice calm but firm, "this isn't the time." Isabella tilted her head, a picture of feigned innocence. "Oh, don't worry. I wouldn't want to spoil the evening." Her gaze lingered on Camila for a beat too long, before she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor like an echo of her intentions. Leonardo turned to Camila, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Don't let her get to you," he said. "She thrives on stirring trouble." Camila nodded, but the damage was done. The weight of Isabella's cryptic remark gnawed at her for the rest of the ride home, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and fear. By the time she stepped into her apartment, she felt drained, her confidence fractured. Sitting in the dim light of her living room, she replayed the night's events over and over, questioning everything: her place in Leonardo's world, his motives, and whether this connection between them was worth the pain it seemed to bring. The next morning, Camila was jolted from her restless sleep by the sound of her phone buzzing. It was a message from Raphael, her co-worker and closest friend. "Heard about the gala? You okay?" Camila hesitated before replying. "Not really. Can we talk later?" Raphael had always been a grounding presence in her life, his pragmatic outlook a stark contrast to her emotional nature. As she arrived at the cafe where they often met, she felt a flicker of relief at the sight of his familiar face. Over coffee, she recounted everything: the gala, Isabella, and the overwhelming sense of inadequacy that followed her everywhere. Raphael listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "You've got to stop letting people like Isabella define you," he said. "Her opinion doesn't matter. What does is how you see yourself." Camila sighed, her gaze dropping to the table. "That's what Leonardo said too." "And he's right," Raphael said firmly. "But you also need to be careful. His world is dangerous, not just because of people like her, but because it has a way of swallowing you whole if you're not grounded." His words struck a chord. Raphael had always been cautious about Leonardo, not out of jealousy, but because he understood the risks of stepping into a life so far removed from her own. And though she valued his honesty, part of her resented his doubts. She wanted to believe in Leonardo, in the possibility of something real between them. But could she trust herself to navigate this labyrinth of wealth and power? That evening, as she walked home, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Leonardo. "I need to see you. There's something I want to explain." The message was simple, but the urgency in his tone unsettled her. She hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering over the screen. Finally, she typed, "When and where?" He sent an address that was unfamiliar, but not far from the city center. When she arrived, she found herself in front of a sleek, high-rise building, its glass facade gleaming under the city lights. Leonardo greeted her in the lobby, his expression serious but soft. "Thank you for coming," he said, as he led her to a private lounge on the top floor. The view was breathtaking, the city sprawling out below like a sea of possibilities. But the grandeur did little to ease Camila's nerves. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. Leonardo exhaled deeply, his gaze distant. "I know Isabella's words shook you, and I know I've put you in a difficult position by bringing you into this world." He turned to her, his expression raw and unguarded. "But there's something you need to know about me, about my past." Camila's breath hitched as he began to speak, his words painting a picture of a life far more complicated than she had imagined. He told her about the struggles that had shaped him, the sacrifices he'd made to build his empire, and the mistakes that still haunted him. But as he spoke, it became clear that there was more, something he wasn't saying. "You've always been honest with me," Camila said softly, "so don't stop now." Leonardo hesitated, his jaw tightening. "There's someone from my past, someone who thinks they can use you to get to me." The room seemed to tilt as his words sank in. Camila stared at him, her thoughts racing. "Is this about Isabella?" "No," he said firmly. "She's petty, but she's not dangerous. This is about someone else. Someone I thought I'd left behind." He didn't elaborate, but the weight of his confession hung between them like a storm cloud. Camila's mind swirled with questions, but one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it was bigger than her, and it wasn't going away. As she left the building that night, her resolve was tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. She couldn't shake the feeling that her connection to Leonardo was becoming a tangled web of secrets and dangers, and she wasn't sure how much more she could endure. But deep down, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not yet. Camila spent the next few days in a haze of uncertainty. Leonardo's cryptic confession lingered in her mind, a puzzle missing too many pieces. Who was this person from his past? What did they want? And why did she feel like a pawn in someone else's game? No matter how hard she tried to focus on her routine, her thoughts always drifted back to him. The tension came to a head one afternoon at work. As Camila cleared a table near the window, she noticed a black car idling across the street. Its tinted windows reflected the sunlight, concealing whoever sat inside. At first, she dismissed it as coincidence. But as the hours passed and the car remained, a sense of unease crept over her. By the time her shift ended, the car was gone, but the discomfort lingered. She walked home quickly, her heart pounding with every step. Once inside her apartment, she double-checked the locks and sat in the silence, her mind racing. Was this paranoia, or was Leonardo's warning already manifesting in ways she couldn't see? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Leonardo. "Are you free tonight? I need to talk." Camila hesitated before responding. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear more, but she also couldn't ignore the growing sense of danger. Finally, she typed, "Yes, where?" He sent an address, this time to a small restaurant tucked away in a quiet part of the city. When she arrived, Leonardo was already waiting, his expression tense. The usual confidence in his demeanor was replaced by something she hadn't seen before: vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat across from him. "I know this hasn't been easy for you." Camila folded her hands in her lap, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Who's the person you're worried about? And why am I involved?" Leonardo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "His name is Victor. He used to be my partner, back when I was just starting out. We built our first company together, but things went south. He got greedy, started cutting corners, making deals that crossed ethical lines. I cut ties with him, but not before he lost everything. He's been holding a grudge ever since." "And now he's coming after you?" Camila asked, her stomach knotting. Leonardo's gaze darkened. "Not just me. He's targeting people close to me. That's why I need you to be careful." The weight of his words settled heavily on her. She had been thrust into a world she barely understood, where wealth and power came with unseen enemies and impossible stakes. But what struck her most was the look in Leonardo's eyes, a mix of regret and resolve, as though he blamed himself for dragging her into this mess. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice softer now. "I didn't want to scare you," he admitted, "but I realize now that keeping you in the dark was a mistake." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food, but the atmosphere remained heavy. As they ate, Leonardo shared more about Victor, painting a picture of a man consumed by bitterness and desperation. Camila listened intently, her emotions shifting between fear and determination. She hadn't chosen this path, but now that she was on it, she couldn't turn back. After dinner, Leonardo walked her to a cab, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "I'll have someone keep an eye on your place," he said, just as a precaution. Camila wanted to protest, to assert her independence, but the truth was, she didn't feel safe. "Okay," she said quietly, "but promise me you'll be careful too." He nodded, his expression softening. "I promise." The ride home was uneventful, but Camila's mind was far from calm. She stared out the window at the city lights, her thoughts a tangled web of fear, anger, and something else, something she wasn't ready to name. She had always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to navigate life's challenges on her own terms. But now, for the first time, she felt like a passenger in her own story. That night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Raphael. "Hey, I haven't seen you around much. Everything okay?" Camila hesitated before replying. "Just dealing with some things. I'll explain later." Raphael's reply came quickly. "I'm here if you need me." The simple gesture brought a flicker of comfort, but it wasn't enough to quell the storm inside her. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams plagued by faceless figures and whispered threats. When she woke the next morning, she felt no more rested than she had the night before. As she prepared for her day, a thought struck her. She couldn't keep living like this, waiting for the other shoe to drop, wondering when Victor's shadow would materialize. If she wanted to reclaim her sense of control, she needed to take action. But what that action would be, she didn't yet know. For now, she would do what she did best, survive. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of something much larger and far more dangerous. than she could have ever imagined. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the cafe, but Camila barely noticed. Her coffee sat untouched, its surface rippling slightly as she tapped her fingers against the table. Across from her, Raphael watched her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You're distracted," he said finally, breaking the silence. Camila sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's just complicated." Raphael leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "If this is about Leonardo, you need to be honest with me. What's really going on?" She hesitated, the weight of her secret pressing against her chest. But she couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. Lowering her voice, she told Raphael everything about Victor, Leonardo's warning, and the uneasy feeling that she was caught in something far bigger than she could handle. Raphael listened intently, his expression darkening with each detail. When she finished, he let out a low whistle. "This is serious, Camila. If this guy is as dangerous as Leonardo says, you can't just wait around for something to happen." "I know," she said quietly. "But what am I supposed to do? I'm not exactly equipped to deal with whatever this is." "You don't have to be," Raphael said firmly. "But you can't just let Leonardo handle it on his own. You need to take control of your own safety." His words struck a nerve, and for the rest of the day, Camila couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. She had spent so much time reacting to the chaos around her that she hadn't stopped to consider how she could take back some measure of power. But what could she do? She wasn't wealthy or influential. She was just an ordinary woman trying to navigate an extraordinary situation. That evening, she decided to confront Leonardo. He was waiting for her at a private rooftop lounge, the city skyline stretching out behind him like a backdrop to a story she wasn't sure she wanted to be part of. As she approached, he turned, his face lighting up briefly before his expression grew serious. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice low. "I was starting to worry." Camila crossed her arms, her resolve steady. "I've been thinking about Victor, about everything." Leonardo's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Go on." "I can't keep living like this," she said, looking over my shoulder, waiting for something to happen. "I need to know what we're dealing with and how we're going to stop it." For a moment, he was silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Then he turned to her, his expression grave. "You're right. I've been trying to protect you by keeping you in the dark. But that's not fair. You deserve to know the truth." He pulled out a sleek tablet and opened a file, showing her a series of documents and photos. As he explained, the pieces began to fall into place. Victor wasn't just an angry ex-partner. He was a man with nothing to lose and a vendetta that had festered for years. He had connections in places Leonardo had hoped he'd never have to confront, and his reach extended far beyond what Camila had imagined. "This is what we're dealing with," Leonardo said, his voice steady but grim. "It's not just about me anymore. It's about anyone he thinks he can use to hurt me." Camila's stomach churned as she absorbed the information. She had expected danger, but this was something else entirely, a level of threat that felt almost surreal. And yet, as terrifying as it was, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leonardo hesitated, his gaze softening. "We fight back, but we do it carefully. Victor thrives on chaos, and the only way to stop him is to outmaneuver him." The resolve in his voice steadied her, but it didn't erase her fear. As they talked, a plan began to take shape, a way to expose Victor's schemes without putting anyone else in harm's way. But it was risky, and it required a level of trust that made Camila's heart ache. Could she trust Leonardo to keep her safe? Could she trust herself to handle what was to come? As the night wore on, Camila found herself staring out at the city, its lights twinkling like distant stars. She thought about everything she had been through, the whispers, the judgment, the overwhelming sense of not belonging. And yet here she was, standing beside a man who believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. "Camila," Leonardo said softly, breaking her reverie, "I know this isn't what you signed up for, and if you want out, I'll understand." She turned to him, her gaze steady. "I'm not going anywhere, but we do this together. No more secrets." For the first time in what felt like forever, Leonardo smiled, a small, genuine smile that made her chest tighten. "Together," he agreed. As they parted ways that night, Camila felt a strange mix of fear and hope. The path ahead was uncertain, and the stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time, she felt like she was more than just a spectator in this story. She was a player, and she was determined to write her own ending. Camila's days became a blur of calculated movements and quiet vigilance. Every step felt heavier, every glance over her shoulder sharper. Though Leonardo had assured her they were taking control, the sense of being watched, of being pursued, lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. True to his word, Leonardo kept her informed. Together, they worked through the details of their plan, one that would shine a spotlight on Victor's dealings without placing her directly in harm's way. But for all their strategy sessions and late-night conversations, the anxiety in Camila's chest refused to dissipate. It wasn't just Victor, it was the weight of her own choices. She had stepped into a world that demanded more than she had ever thought herself capable of giving. And yet, here she was, trying to hold her ground in a storm that threatened to sweep her away. One evening, as she sat by the window of her apartment, her phone buzzed. The message was from Leonardo. "I need you to trust me tonight. Meet me at this address at 9 p.m. The location was a nondescript building in a quiet part of town, far from the glittering high-rises and opulent venues she had come to associate with his world. Camila arrived on time, her pulse quickening as she stepped inside. The space was dimly lit, its walls lined with filing cabinets and shelves filled with documents. Leonardo was waiting for her, along with a man she didn't recognize, a sharp-eyed figure with an air of authority. "This is Marcus," Leonardo said, introducing the man with a nod. "He's been helping us gather the evidence we need to take Victor down." Marcus extended a hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "It's good to finally meet you, Camila. Leonardo speaks highly of you." She nodded, still wary. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing to the room around them. "This," Marcus said, "is the beginning of the end for Victor. We've traced his operations, mapped out his network, and uncovered the cracks in his armor. But there's one thing we need to seal the deal." Leonardo stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Victor's been watching you, Camila, not because you're involved, but because he thinks he can use you to get to me. We need to make him believe he's succeeded." Her breath caught. "You want to use me as bait?" "Not exactly," Marcus interjected. "We want him to think he's already won. If he believes you're vulnerable, he'll make a move. And when he does, we'll be ready." The weight of their plan settled heavily on her. She understood the logic, but the risk felt immense. Could she really put herself in Victor's crosshairs, even if it meant ending this nightmare for good? "I wouldn't ask you to do this if there were another way," Leonardo said, his voice softening. "But you're stronger than you realize, Camila, and you're not alone in this." She looked between the two men, her mind racing. It wasn't just her safety on the line. It was her sense of control, her ability to face the chaos of Leonardo's world without losing herself in it. Finally, she nodded. "What do I need to do?" Over the next hour, they walked her through the details of the plan. Every step was precise, every contingency accounted for. Camila listened intently, her nerves steadying as the pieces fell into place. By the time she left the building, she felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting, she was acting. The following evening, the plan was set in motion. Camila followed the instructions carefully, her every move calculated to draw Victor's attention. She visited a cafe near her apartment, lingered at a bookstore she frequented, and took a winding route home, ensuring she passed the places where Victor's men were most likely watching. It worked. As she rounded the corner to her building, she caught sight of a figure lingering near the entrance, a man she didn't recognize, his posture casual but his gaze too focused. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was what they had prepared for. Inside, she made her way to her apartment, leaving the door slightly ajar as instructed. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. She held her breath, her heart pounding as she waited. The door creaked open and a shadow stretched across the floor. Before she could react, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Step away from the door." It was Marcus, his tone cold and commanding. The figure in the doorway froze, his hands raised as two more men appeared behind Marcus, their weapons drawn. Camila watched, her fear giving way to a flood of relief as the intruder was subdued and escorted out. Leonardo arrived moments later, his expression a mix of concern and relief. "Are you okay?" he asked, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. She nodded, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I'm fine." Marcus approached, his demeanor professional. "That was one of Victor's men. He'll talk, or we'll make sure he has nothing left to hide." The gravity of the situation hit Camila as she looked around the room. She had been a target, a pawn in someone else's game. But now, for the first time, she felt like she had turned the tables. As Leonardo walked her home that night, his hand brushing hers lightly, she realized something had shifted. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by something stronger, a determination to see this through, no matter the cost. The following days passed in a tense rhythm, each moment weighted with anticipation. Camila tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the events of the past weeks had etched themselves into her thoughts, leaving a lingering unease. Though Victor's man had been captured, she knew it was only the beginning. Men like Victor didn't crumble easily. They retaliated. Leonardo, however, remained a steady presence. He checked on her frequently, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the chaos swirling around them. Yet even as he reassured her, Camila couldn't ignore the weight he carried. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his voice faltered when he spoke of their next steps. Their plan had shaken Victor's network, forcing him to act in desperation. Marcus had been relentless, working behind the scenes to gather enough evidence to expose Victor's operations. Camila played her part carefully, sticking to routines that gave the illusion of vulnerability while keeping her under constant protection. It was a fragile balance, one that left her exhausted but resolute. One evening, Leonardo arrived at her apartment, his expression graver than usual. He didn't bother with pleasantries as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said, his tone low. Camila set her mug down, her heart quickening. "What's going on?" "Victor made his move," Leonardo said, pacing the room. "He's trying to shift the narrative, make it look like I'm the one who wronged him. He's reaching out to old allies, spreading lies, and it's working." Camila's stomach churned. "What does that mean for us?" Leonardo stopped, his gaze locking onto hers. "It means we're running out of time. Marcus has enough evidence to expose him, but if Victor gets ahead of us, it won't matter. He'll destroy everything, my reputation, my business. You." The last word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears. Camila took a steadying breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Then what do we do?" Leonardo hesitated, his jaw tightening. "We go public." Her eyes widened. "Public? You mean—" "I mean we release everything," he said. "The evidence, the connections, the deals. We expose him before he has a chance to silence us." Camilla's mind raced. Going public meant stepping into the spotlight, becoming a target in a way she hadn't anticipated. But as terrifying as the prospect was, she knew it was their only option. "If we do this," she said slowly, "there's no going back." Leonardo nodded. "I know, but it's the only way." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus coordinated with trusted contacts, ensuring the evidence was airtight and ready for release. Camila found herself thrust into the heart of the operation, her role more critical than ever. She wasn't just a pawn anymore, she was a player, and the stakes were higher than she could have imagined. When the day finally came, Camila stood beside Leonardo in a dimly lit room, her hands trembling as she watched Marcus prepare the final steps. The evidence would be released to multiple outlets simultaneously, ensuring that Victor couldn't suppress the story. But the real challenge would come after, when the world would turn its gaze on them. Leonardo placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "Are you ready?" Camila met his gaze, her fear giving way to determination. "Yes." The next moments passed in a blur. Marcus sent the files, and within minutes the world began to shift. Phones buzzed, news alerts blared, and the quiet hum of the room erupted into a symphony of chaos. Camila watched as the headlines spread, each one striking a blow against Victor's carefully constructed empire. But as the initial wave of relief washed over her, a new thought emerged. Victor wouldn't go down without a fight, and she was right. That evening, as Camila returned to her apartment, a sense of unease settled over her. The shadows felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. She double-checked her locks, her mind racing with possibilities. Just as she began to relax, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. She froze, her heart pounding as she approached the door. "Who is it?" she called, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. There was no response. Another knock, louder this time, sent a shiver down her spine. Grabbing her phone, she quickly texted Leonardo, "Someone's at my door, I don't know who." His reply came almost instantly, "Stay where you are, I'm on my way." Minutes felt like hours as Camila stood by the door, her breath shallow. When the knock came again, she finally summoned the courage to peek through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived. As she stepped back, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "You think you're safe? Think again." Camila's blood ran cold. The message was clear. Victor wasn't finished, and whatever came next would be more dangerous than anything she had faced before. The hours that followed the message stretched into an agonizing blur. Camila paced her apartment, her mind a storm of fear and resolve. She had spent weeks navigating the dangers of Leonardo's world, but now it was no longer a shadowy threat. Victor had made it personal. Leonardo arrived shortly after her call, his presence a calming force despite the tension etched into his face. He was accompanied by Marcus, whose expression was as unreadable as ever. They examined the message, their quiet exchange of words leaving Camila on edge. "This confirms it," Marcus said finally, his tone clipped. "Victor's desperate. He's trying to scare you into backing down." Camila's voice was steady despite the tremor in her chest. "It won't work." Leonardo glanced at her, his expression softening. "You don't have to face this alone, Camila. I promise we'll protect you." She nodded, but her resolve was clear. This wasn't just about protection. It was about facing the storm head on. For too long, she had let others define her strength, her worth. But now, standing beside Leonardo, she felt a power she hadn't known she possessed. The next day, the fallout from their revelation hit the headlines like a tidal wave. Victor's empire began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny, his allies scattering as the evidence mounted. But with every victory came a new threat. Camila found herself in the eye of the storm, her name splashed across tabloids, her every move dissected by strangers. Leonardo stayed close, his support unwavering. He arranged for additional security, ensuring that Victor's reach wouldn't touch her. But even as they celebrated their small victories, Camila couldn't shake the feeling that the final confrontation was imminent. That evening, she and Leonardo sat in his penthouse, the city lights stretching out before them like a sea of possibilities. "Why do you still do it?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Fight so hard to protect everything, even when it puts you in danger." Leonardo looked at her, his gaze steady. "Because it's not just about me. It's about the people I care about, the people who rely on me, and now..." His voice trailed off, his expression softening. "Now, it's about you too." The weight of his words settled over her, a mixture of comfort and fear. She wasn't used to being someone's priority, to having her worth recognized so deeply. But with Leonardo, it felt natural, right? The final confrontation came the next night. Marcus had tracked Victor to a secluded property on the city's outskirts where he was preparing to flee. It was risky, but they knew it was their best chance to end this once and for all. Leonardo insisted on going, and despite his protests, Camila refused to stay behind. The drive to the property was tense, the silence filled with unspoken fears. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Victor's men scrambling to destroy evidence, his car idling near the entrance. Marcus moved swiftly, his team securing the perimeter as Leonardo and Camila approached. Victor emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of defiance. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice venomous. "This isn't over." Leonardo stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "It is over, Victor. Your games, your threats, they end here." For a moment, the two men faced off, a silent battle of wills. Then, in a move that took everyone by surprise, Victor lunged at Leonardo. Camila's heart seized as the chaos unfolded, but before she could react, Marcus's team intervened, subduing Victor and his men with precision. As the dust settled, Camila felt a wave of relief wash over her. The nightmare was over. Victor was in custody, his empire in ruins. But more than that, she felt a sense of closure, a newfound strength she hadn't known she possessed. In the weeks that followed, life began to return to normal. The media frenzy died down, and Camila found herself rediscovering the quiet moments she had once taken for granted. But one thing had changed: her perspective. She was no longer the woman who doubted her worth, who let others dictate her path. She was someone who had faced the storm and come out stronger. One evening, as she and Leonardo sat together on the rooftop of his building, she looked out at the city with a newfound sense of possibility. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said, her voice filled with wonder, "but I'm glad I did." Leonardo took her hand, his gaze filled with warmth. "You're stronger than you realize, Camila, and no matter what comes next, I'll be by your side." As they sat together under the stars, the journey they had shared felt like the beginning of something new. Their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And now, let me ask you, what would you have done in Camila's place? Would you have taken the same risks, faced the same fears? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, love, and triumph. Your voice matters, and we'd love to hear it.